and welcome to Tullahomas Cooking. I'm your host, Kelly Lepchinsky, and today we're going to make something a little bit different, especially for this time of year. I'll tell you why. So right now, the holidays are upon us, and we know that for most of November and December, we're going to be seeing a lot of the same kind of meals just about everywhere we go. Whether we have family parties or events, Thanksgiving at our house, Christmas at Grandma's, we're going to be seeing a lot of turkey and Thanksgiving and mashed potatoes and gravy, and that's great. I love all of that stuff. I'm sure you do too. But every once in a while, you've got to get away from that. You've just got to say, okay, I've had enough, or I'm going to have enough. I want something simple, easy, and very, very different, and that's what we're going to do today. So when I think Thanksgiving, of course, I'm thinking of poultry. I'm thinking of the turkey and the dressing. And when I think ahead to Christmas, I'm thinking of possibly ham or more turkey. So the one item that really came to mind as something we don't eat a lot of right now is beef. Simple beef, a lot of beef and potatoes during the regular year, but not now. The other thing I thought is flavor, an intense flavor that we don't necessarily do a lot at this time of year, unless of course we have a Christmas story and the Bumpus's dogs have come in to eat the turkey and we've got to go to the Asian restaurant, because soy sauce is the feature of the recipe we're making today. So let me bring in my handy dandy little tray and we'll get to it. So today we're making pepper steak. I'm making it a little different than a traditional pepper steak. It makes it so tasty to throw in tomatoes. They're not usually in there. We're going to start, usually I start with an eye of round. Now when I went shopping this week, eye of round wasn't available. This is top round, same thing, or buy already cut up stew beef. And this is already fairly thinly cut, but we're going to go ahead and cut it down to maybe like 1-inch slices. All right. So I've got my handy dandy knife here, and we're just going to give those, make them literally a strip steak. Here we go. And I'm sure that probably means a specific cut, but for right now I'm talking about a specific style of cutting. And we're just going to get them, I mean, really about a finger width, as I think what I'm looking at here, about a finger width of steak between each cut. And then we're going to go back to each of these cuts and make them a little more morsel size, a little more bite-sized, all right? And we're close there. Here we go. Already I can smell that soy sauce in front of me, and I'm just so looking forward to this dish. Now, unfortunately, that soy sauce is right there wanting to shake with the table, so I'm going to move that out of the way. All right, now that I've got what I said was about a finger width worth of beef, I'm also going to make it about a finger long, about 2-3 inches there. So I'm going to do that, though, now that you've got the reference, I'm going to do it to several at a time just to save us a little bit of time on camera there. And it doesn't matter if they're a little bit shorter, but you do want to make them somewhat consistent to each other so that the cooking time's about right. Now, I say that mostly out of habit, because one of the things you're doing with pepper steak is you're not necessarily looking for the best cuts of beef. I said buy stew meat. And one of the advantages of something like a stew meat is that it gets better or more tender the longer you cook it. So you're not looking for something that has to cook consistently at the same temperature and brown all at the same time, because you're going to let them cook a long time. Now, this was a pound, a little more than a pound of beef, and we are going to season it with some of our typical seasonings and some soy sauce and let that marinate. I'm going to do that right here in the pan. No reason not to. So I'm going to throw all of that beef that we've just cut, and I'll use my scraper for that to put it right there in the pan and throw it in there with a little bit of, I've pre-mixed some seasonings, but it's typical salt, pepper, a little garlic powder, a little onion powder. I think I went heaviest with the garlic powder because I'm not using any garlic cloves in here, any garlic, cloves? Anyway, I'm not using any pieces of garlic, any diced garlic in here. I also used a little bit of onion powder, but not a lot, because we're going to use a lot of onions. And then just some salt and pepper. It's enough to cover the meat. You can see I think I used actually quite a lot, but remember this is also going to cover our green peppers and our onions, once they all end up in this is a one pot dish except for the rice. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But I'm going to cover all of our meat nice and seasoned. Just got a bit of that pepper there. And then we're going to throw in a little of that soy sauce. Now this case is 2 tablespoons of soy sauce. Okay, and we're just going to toss the meat in there with our seasoning and get it good and covered. And then you want to let that marinate. Now this is all up to you at this point. You can let this marinate and really sink in for about an hour, but then you're not making a quick meal. You have to plan ahead to do that. It's not going to hurt a thing if you go ahead and cook it right like this. But we've got some more prep to do. So I'm going to go ahead and get this ready to marinate. Wash this off my hands real quick. And that is good to go. That is good to sit for a minute. Now, the next thing we're going to need are the peppers and the onions. They are also going to get marinated in a little bit of soy sauce and a little bit of sherry. Now, I don't have a lot of sherry. This has been in my house for years, but it's cooking wine. It's not going to get worse for wear. Wine ages, and cooking wine no less. So we're just going to use the rest of what I have. But if you wanted a measurement for that, I would probably match it to your soy sauce. Now, our soy sauce, that's what this one was that was sloshing around. This one was 3 tablespoons. I'm not even sure I have that much of the sherry, and I'll go ahead and use the used ramekin. Okay, about the same. A little more sherry, but empty the bottle. It'll cook off mostly anyway, but it does add a nice deep flavor. Now, let's go ahead and get these parts marinated while I cut up the rest, and we'll toss them once I've got everybody in there. So that's our sherry and our soy sauce. But I wanted to go ahead and make a couple of pointers here about our vegetables, because you do want them in strips. That was my meat knife. Let's go to my cutting knife. And if you haven't seen me cut a green pepper before, I usually do this from the underside and let the bulb of the green pepper decide where the cut goes, because that way you're going in between those veins and you're going to miss all of those seeds. So you get a nice clean cut nearly every time, right all the way around. I could probably use a little of that right there and see if I missed anything. But there you go. You've got your green pepper good to go, and you just want to cut it into long strips. Now, you may have heard some people talk about whether they have 3 lobes on the bottom or 4 lobes on the bottom. I think that's pretty much been debunked as to whether or not that's a male or a female green pepper, and which one's sweeter and which one is not. But if you believe in that, if you think it hasn't been debunked, I don't know enough to know for sure if it has. Go ahead and get one of each, and that way you know you've got that nice and balanced. Now, with the onion, and I'm just going to throw these in there as the chunks. It won't hurt anything. With the onion, I cut from the top of the bulb to the bottom of the bulb, so to keep them in a straight, to get that nice straight slit of a cut there. So you get those nice long strips, and then I'm just going to cut off the edges where those little growing parts go, the bits and ends. And so you just separate them out. You have nice long strips of onion. Now, I've already got 1 onion in there. This is and part of the one you just saw me cut, because I didn't think you needed to see me cut 2 onions, but this is 2 onions. And same thing with the green pepper. So we have 2 long slits or 2 onions cut in long slits, 2 green peppers cut in long slits, and they're about to marinate. So what we're going to do now is we are going to let these 2 things marinate. Now, I'm only going to give them a couple of minutes, but you could give them as much as an hour if you're not in any hurry. My point here today is to show you this doesn't take very long to make, though. So we're going to go to a commercial break. We'll come back and put some components together right after this. And welcome back to Tullahomas Cooking. Today we are making a pepper steak, and when we went to break, we had the meat tossed and seasoned. We have the peppers and onions tossed and seasoned. Now we're going to put them all together. Now I'll be honest, had I actually done the meat in a different bowl, I probably would have heated the pan before putting the meat in it, but I've heated up this element here and we're just going to go with what we've got rather than dirty up another bowl. So instead of the oil on the bottom of the pan, I'm just going to drizzle it over the top of the meat and do a little turning and flipping as it heats up. So we're browning our meat now for that stew beef, okay? And that's probably going to take us a minute or two. So I'm going to kind of walk you through a couple of the other things that we're going to be doing here. Okay, when our meat is nice and browned and ready to add the vegetables, that's what we're going to do. We're going to add our peppers and onions, let them go in with all the seasoning and the soy sauce that the meat brings to the party. The vegetables, if you remember, are also bringing some soy sauce to the party. So we're going to let the beef brown, and you can already sort of see all that seasoning is leaving a little bit of what's going to become a sauce, sort of a gravy or a glaze for our pepper steak once we add the liquids and a thickening agent. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about, because today I'm using cornstarch to be our thickening agent. Now, the reason I'm using cornstarch and not flour, there's a couple reasons. First of all, you can use less cornstarch because it's a better thickening agent. You don't have to use as much of it. Also, flour you sort of have to cook down to cook the flour taste out. Cornstarch does not really bring a hefty flavor of its own to the party, so it's doing double duty there. It's not getting in the way of your recipe. You're using less of it and you're getting a better thickening glaze. But it's going to be a minute before we can get to that part because we need to brown this meat. So I'll tell you another trick that we're going to come to later in the episode. And maybe I could turn that up just a little bit while we're in the browning stages. Tomato. I told you at the beginning of this, tomato is not something you will traditionally find in a pepper steak. When I come to making that sort of that gravy, that sauce that I was just talking about, I really like what tomato does to that thickening sauce. But cornstarch and tomatoes don't play well together at the outset. You really don't want that acid of the tomato to prevent your cornstarch from thickening what we're already making. So what you're going to see once we have some browned beef and once we have our vegetables in there is that I'm going to go ahead and add that cornstarch in and start making that sauce and that glaze before we ever touch a tomato. And then once we've got the glaze going, then I'm going to add the tomatoes, and we're going to let the tomatoes cook down until they almost disappeared. All of those juice and that seed and we'll get down to just a little strip of skin you barely even notice, but it will have thickened the sauce with a little extra flavor. It does bring its own flavor to the party in a way that cornstarch just does not. And for me, it's a flavor I really enjoy. Now, I'm a big fan of tomato-based sauces, Italian food, spaghettis and pizzas and things like that. Big fan. If you're not, you don't have to keep the tomatoes in this. Like I said, they're not traditional. I just really like what they do. So now we've got a little bit of browning happening on our beef here. You can see, because I've turned that heat way up to speed this up. Got a couple pink places, but that's okay. As I mentioned earlier, we've got stew beef basically going on. We're going to let this cook for quite a while. So even if I don't have it completely browned before I put in my veggies, the veggies are going to be in there quite a while too. So I think we've got enough of a brown now, almost consistently enough. You can see, you'll still see a few pink spots. But do you see how, well, I wish I could pick that up right there. You can see how there's a little bit of, just a little bit of that sort of covering, that sort of coarseness of all the spice that we put on there. That is so going to help make a delicious glaze. And we are at the point now, or let me get that right off, we're at the point now where I'm willing to go ahead and throw those vegetables in. I'm going to bring my temperature back down because I unnaturally heated it up to speed it up for you, but you can do this however you brown beef, however long you like to take to get a good brown, a good sear. Turning it up probably didn't hurt getting a sear since I did start in a cold pan. So, while we're sizzling away, we're going to put in all of our veggies. Now remember that had your sherry and your soy sauce. But if you remember, we put 2 tablespoons of soy sauce in that beef. You didn't see any liquid in that pan as I was spreading around. That all marinated into the beef, and I only took a commercial break. We did not let that marinate for an hour. It still sucked up all of that soy sauce. So you're bringing more liquid into the party with what you've just put in with the peppers and the onions. You may find later on that you want to add even more. But this is going to take a minute, and as I mentioned, we're not going to add our cornstarch until we do have that base of a sort of a gravy going. And we're not going to add our tomatoes until after we have got our cornstarch in. So I am now going to let this cook down, let those veggies cook down a little bit, and that's just a matter of time. That's just probably 5-10 minutes, depending on your heat, maybe a little bit more because of how much of them are in this pot. So I'm just going to go to another quick commercial break to give these time to soften up. All I'm going to be doing is stirring for about 5 minutes, maybe more, maybe less, but you'll know what you're looking for when we come back right after this. Welcome back. We are now to the point where I'm going to do some of the things I told you about in the last segment for our pepper steak. Now you can see that I ended up putting a lid on this because as the green peppers and the onions cooked down, they also contributed their own liquids. And I'm going to let you see here, I'm going to hope not to spill it, but you can see it is bubbling and much more wet than when we started out. So they have now cooked down to a nice soft consistency. You can see that our onions and peppers sort of melt off the spoon there a little bit right there. You see that flipping over? So they are at a good place to go ahead and start to make our cornstarch thickening agent. Now I don't want to put a bunch of dry cornstarch right on top of this. Then you'll get little pockets of dry powder that you just have to mix and mix and mix. So we're going to make kind of a slurry out of our cornstarch. And I'm going to go ahead and let that, I don't want all of my liquid to steam out and make this dry. We're going to keep that liquid in there. That's what our lid is for. Now I have a tablespoon of cornstarch. I doubt I'm going to use all of it. We'll find out as we go, but I'm going to go ahead and make a liquid from all of it. And I'm going to do that partially by taking some of the liquid we're already using. I'm not going to add water to the ratio. I'm not going to dumb down my spices. They're already in here and they're already liquid. So I'm going to use what we've already got, a little bit of that liquid that's already there, and sort of slurry up this cornstarch. I got an onion in there too. It's not going to matter. It's all going right back in the pot. There you go. See how I'm making just a little, there we go, a little thick, already thick agent that can go right back in there and helps thicken all that up. Now you might notice though that now what we've got now is kind of a light brown and should have a little bit of that flavor, but it's going to be mostly, mostly cornstarchy. So what I want to know, and I'm going to grab a fork, and what I want to know right now is how much of the flavor that we've already used am I getting right now in my vegetables? Okay, very hot and steamy. Be careful if you do this. Blow on it, whatever you need to do. Okay, it held on to it. It's got some good spice. And it's got a lot of it. It took a lot of the pepper and the garlic that we put on that meat. It really did take that really nicely as well. But what I'm afraid is that putting a whole tablespoon of cornstarch into that slurry is going to dumb down our soy sauce a little bit. So I'm going to add just a little bit of soy sauce in there. A dollop or two. All I want to see is that light brown become a little bit richer. Just show me. It doesn't have to be as dark as a soy sauce bottle, but I didn't want it that light blonde. I want to see a little bit of the brown. I might even do just a little bit more. All right, make it a little more brunette. All right. And that's just me. That's just my taste. You might want to go ahead, if you've never made this before, go ahead and put your slurry in and then decide if you want more soy. I'm just pretty confident that it was going to need it with how much liquid we've got in there and how much slurry I was about to add in. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and bring my temperature down a little more on the medium-low side because we're boiling at medium right now. I want to be able to stir this in and then add our tomatoes once we've got that nice sauce. And I don't want to blister the tomatoes or break them apart on impact. So here we go. We're just going to throw in our new cornstarch slurry. I said I didn't think I was going to use all of it, but I was wrong. I 100% put every darn bit of that in there. And we might come back for more when we see how this is thickening up. And it doesn't take long. It acts fairly quickly. If you saw how liquid that was when it was boiling, you can now see, and of course my pot handle has gotten a little warm in this whole cooking process, so it's a little harder to tip towards you now. But almost immediately, all that liquid that was just bubbling, that was just boiling, is becoming a glaze for our meat and vegetables. And we've got, because we're no longer boiling and bubbling, I'm feeling a little more confident about putting those tomatoes in, but I'm going to give it just a little bit more time because, as I mentioned, the acid and the cornstarch are not big friends. So we want to make sure that everybody's coated, everybody's got that glaze before I throw them a curveball. There you go. All right. I don't know how that looks on camera, but it looks awesome standing right here in front of it. All right, now what we're going to do, as I mentioned, the tomatoes are also sort of they're both going to thicken and thin. This is very hard to explain. But what we got right now is a pretty thick glaze. That glaze is going to break apart a little bit and thin, but the sauce is going to thicken a little bit with the tomato. You could stop right here. You could make rice, you're done. This would be a traditional pepper steak. But as I've mentioned, I like the tomatoes. And for it to be November, this is a bit of a surprise, but my tomato plants were so late to start producing this year that I still have a fresh tomato from my own garden. I did buy one from the store because that wasn't going to do enough to this, but I want it in there. I want this guy to give me some good old tomato freshness that I did myself. Okay, that I, put a water in a pot, I guess. Nature did the rest. But how can you help but be proud when you've made a tomato that looked as beautiful as that one did before I started slicing him? Now, that's my tomato. And I just cut it small because it was small. But this was a store-bought beefsteak. And so I did it kind of in the same sort of strips that we did with the peppers and the onions. And they'll just go right in on top. And I don't even think I really want to incorporate them. I think I'm just going to let them sit on top and get some of that steam and that heat. Put that lid back on. And we're going to let them just simmer. Just simmer until I was going to say until you kind of don't see them, but you do really have to stir them for that to happen. So we're going to give them a little time to get some heat. I'm going to give them a stir. And since I'm probably going to end up having to do that off camera, let's just go ahead and do that now, because when we take the next commercial break, I'm going to make some rice because we're going to serve this pepper steak over rice, and you will see how the tomatoes have cooked down when we come back for that right after this. And welcome back. We are here in the final stages of our pepper steak episode. Now that little commercial break was a little longer than the other ones because we had to cook some rice to serve this over. And I made a 20-minute rice. Was 1 cup of raw rice, 2 cups of water. Bring it to a boil, stick a lid on it, let the steam cook it for 20 minutes. Now that is good to go. And let me show you what that 20 minutes did for our stew. I'm not gonna lie, I gave this a little taste test to make sure it was coming along nicely. And I had the most egotistical thought. I thought, oh my gosh, this is so good, they should give me a cooking show. So, yeah. So because I had that thought, I decided I better tell you exactly what I put in that stew beef because this came out spectacular. So I have out the ingredients that I told you about in the first section, but I didn't tell you amounts. I told you that I used mostly garlic. Well, what I did is I used the first 4 rings on my tablespoon-teaspoon set. So 1 tablespoon of garlic, the next one down I did pepper, the next one down was onion, and the next one down was salt. And oh my goodness, did that come out just perfectly. So that was a tablespoon, a half a tablespoon, a teaspoon, and a half a teaspoon. Well, that's easy enough. I just had to put that out and tell you because that came out so good. And now you can see the tomatoes have really cooked down and made a sauce that covers the back of our spoon. So good. And we are just going to put that on our rice. Now, here we go. I guess I should use the handle for that. I'm going to just use a little disher here, get myself a good scoop of rice. Make some room on that for our pepper steak. And maybe I'll use our ladle to put that right on there. Get a little meat, get a little pepper. And what we have got there is our pepper steak. Now you don't really need a side dish with this because you've got your carbohydrates in the rice, you've got your meat, you've got your veg. Anything you really need to go is right there. So I don't even recommend making a side dish, but of course if you want a piece of bread on the side, go for it. Now I already know how the sauce came out. Let's see how the meat and the rice and the whole dish. See, that's what I was talking about with the tomatoes going to almost nothing. It's just that little bit of the what was left of the peel. Tasty though. The beef has a little bit of chew to it. Oh my gosh, though. It's nice. Again, with the tomatoes, what they really brought to it was a richness, but you got that spice from the garlic and the black pepper and the onion, and then that the rice, the plainness of the rice kind of gives it something to play off of and just bring it down and keep it from being too hot. Man, I really hope you enjoy this. I hope you make this or something like it before we get too deep into the holidays, because you know you're not going to be seeing a lot of food like this. And hey, by the way, since the last time we met, we've got a new kitchen helper. This is Lola. She came from the Tullahoma Animal Shelter. You see us share new dogs there every week. And boy, you can get some good ones. So yeah, no, you're not going to get any pepper steak though. All right, guys. She's been really good for this episode, so we wanted to say thank you to her as well. And again, thank you to you guys so much for letting us know how much you like this edition of Tullahomas Cooking. We'll be doing them again more often now, so keep your eyes out for a new one. Thanks for watching.